Welcome and good evening. This is October 28th, 2021, and the second lecture in the series on the nature of the human being, a study of the elements, the four elements. And in this, our second series, we're going to be talking about the four elements in nature, and most particularly in the plant kingdom. And very soon, after a recapitulation and introduction, I'll turn this over to my husband, as promised, who is an expert biodynamic farmer and gardener with many decades of experience, and he'll be taking us to the plant kingdom. But let me recapitulate what we have gotten to so far. First of all, please celebrate with all of us on the West Coast that in fact, the weather is changing. We have had rains and we can say, thank God we can use our windshield wipers again. And it's so wonderful to have rain. And here that means for us that in a way our pseudo spring is beginning because the grasses are getting green. That's a moment for celebration. It's getting colder and it's getting darker. This, October 28th, is the week of Halloween, the night of the Halloween, the hallowed nights, and that precedes the nights of All Souls and All Saints. And as we talked about last time, this is going to be an acknowledgement of the fact that in this season of the year, as summer has ended, and winter is beginning, or even fall has ended, we're moving towards winter. We really have a threshold moment, crossing between two worlds, ready to plunge into the dark. And this time is a recognizing and a reckoning both of dying and then also of the souls who are going to be getting born. And last time, in honor of this and in preparation for our work, I spoke a poem for us, a poem about the sun, the stars and the sun and the moon, and about the four elements. And I'll speak that for us again as we get ready to begin. And the poem reads, I was born of the shining of distant stars. I drew their beams with me from afar. I was born of the gold of the radiant sun, of the light of the world, ere the earth begun. Born I was of the silver eye, of the guardian moon keeping watch on high. Born of the flame's intensity, born of the wild winds roaming free, born of the waves that lap the shore and the rocks that hide the glittering ore. Born I was from out of the whole, I bear the world within my soul. Beautiful words, an anonymous poet, and yet so inspiring. And yes, in one of our upcoming Eurythmy modules, we will work on this. So before I turn this class over to my husband, I'd like to recapitulate what we did last time, just so that we've got all of our thoughts current, ready to dive. I began by bringing the central thought, spirit and matter are one. Although we meet them in different ways and with different experiences, essentially, they are one thing manifesting in different ways. And at this time in our human embodiments on earth, we meet them in this way that we experience, we feel that the sense world, the material world, comes to us as an impression from outside, and the spiritual world comes as an impression that we complement it with from the inside. When we sometimes study the nature of thinking, we'll see it's really much more complex than that. But we'll begin with saying they're the same thing. And the question is, how did matter develop out of spirit? And I spoke the last time, you remember, of the alchemical process of solidification and sublimation. And the more I think about that, preparing these lectures for you, the more intrigued I am by this whole process. I drew this as a reminder of what we did last week. We have up here, if you can imagine, the world of spirit. I'm just looking at this little diagram right now. Spirit here, matter here. And when spirit condenses, we call that process condensation or thal. And when matter turns back into spirit, we call that salt or sublimation. And the movement between is Mercury, which just means changing activity. And that's actually involved in so many things: thinking, feeling, willing, our inside world growing, changing, grounding, so much. That's another conversation. And you'll remember then we went into that more specifically and said that we had an original fire or warmth element, which is the source of all being. Being needs fire to become self-conscious and creative. And being then gradually allowed this original fire to become more independent and distant, became what we now know as air. Complex story, but air, from there water, and from there earth. Fire, air, water, and earth. I hope you'll remember that we did that last time. And then as we talked about that, I took a few minutes to remind us or to cite different literature from the Hopi native people, from the Kabbalah, from ancient sacred Jewish texts, from the book of Genesis, and ultimately took us into the home territory that we're working from, the modern study of Rudolf Steiner anthroposophy, this great book, Occult Science. And Rudolf Steiner used the names to describe this fourfold process. He called the first step Saturn, the second Sun, third Moon, the fourth Earth. And to imagine the great magnitude of that, they said Saturn was even at the beginning of time. So we can't just think, oh, a million years ago, or a trillion, or a gazillion years ago. No, at the beginning of time. And then for untold, it's not even measurable. We measure present day time with the sun, but on unspeakable time, Saturn began the process of creating. And what was created on Saturn eventually became what now we know as physical. Then a rest, and then what we call sun. Time had begun, but now space begins. And that began in the process of air, what we now know as air, but it was actually a universe of wisdom. So many stories to tell. That disappeared. And then a third story, and we had what we call ancient moon, and this fire and air. Part of it, not all of it, part of it condensed even further and became water-like. And then the fourth stage, we have Earth, where we are now, and that's where our story is being told. And so just a little characterization here. These four elements we call conditions of spiritual manifestation. And as I said last time, these are not the periodic table, the 104, 108, or 112 elements, however many that is. Those are conditions of manifestation. And anything like, for instance, water can be earthly when it's frozen. It can be liquid, it can be water when it's at our room temperature. It can become air when it is evaporating. And when it gets back to original essence, we might call it pure hydrogen and oxygen, but those are scientific, mechanical, scientific, atomistic names, but it can also get back to essence until we have real being. And these four elements in Earth have four qualities: fire, hot, dry; air, hot and moist, or warm and moist; water, cool and moist; earth is called cool and dry. These are ancient alchemical processes. It's so marvelous to know they were described as such by the ancient Greeks and described as such by the North American indigenous people. It's really a common perception to have these four stages and four qualities. Let's continue a little bit more. So here we have the four elements in circles, in a circle: earth, water, air, and fire, and a lot of other words that I'll just use to get us going here. This circle describes what is living in these different elements in our time. In our time, the earth manifests in mountains and crystals and rocks and bones and teeth, things that are hard and fixed. These are real manifestations of the earth, pure earth element. Again, think of minerals, not moving, not crawling. That which is really water manifests in the natural world around us as rivers, oceans, lakes, rain. That which manifests as air in the natural world around us that we live in, our environment. They're in the atmosphere, the skies, the blues, the winds. And that which is fire in the world around us, well, of course, it's the heat of the weather, of course, and in the natural world, the volcanoes. And I want you to see the circular pattern, because actually these four in the living body of the earth cycle around in their dominance every year. We have here the four seasons. Let's begin by thinking of the element of water. For instance, in winter, the water is frozen, earth, cold and hard. But we can go further. The plants are in the earth. The earth in many, many places gets cold. And we don't have this profusion of life that we have in the summer that we're going to have when my husband talks to you soon. So the whole energy of wintertime is earth. And now think what happens. We all know, we tell the story every year. In springtime, we begin to have movement as the seeds sprout, and as slowly the leaves peer out of the ground, and then the leaves begin to unfold, the stem is lifted. That's because the earth begins to be warmer, the water body is enlivened, and the life is thereby able to enter into the earth element. Springtime belongs to water. And we'll go further, because summertime is archetypally when the flowers are unfolding in color, beautiful color and fragrance and so on. It's a celebration of the air. The astral world, we'll talk about that in just a moment, is alive. in great contrast to the coldness, the earth element of winter, the air element, external nature, manifest spirit happens in summer. And in fire then, as the leaves turn blazing colors, the earth in autumn, the earth is in a way burnt. The leaves are burnt away. Summer is finished in order that the earth again can withdraw into itself, Mother Nature. Let's go around the circle one more time here. Not only do we live in the elements in the natural world, but also we live in each kingdom, the four kingdoms of nature, each specialize in one particular element of the elements. This story is going to have a lot of chapters in it as we go forward. But we not only have outer elements, but we also have inner elements. The inherent nature of the earth element is our physical body, bones and teeth, which in the natural world is most manifest, as I said, by the minerals. The natural element in here of the water is the life body, living body, the body of life. We have a life body, animals have a life body, plants have a life body, minerals don't. So the perfect example of living physical are the plants. We'll go further with that. We call this the etheric body. In animals which have an internalized air body, and there's much to say about that. It's not only that we can breathe, but it's also that embryologically we have an amniotic sac, and beings with a central nervous system have this with the most complexity. More stories to tell there. These animals have an astral body. They can sense inside themselves. An internalized air body. This characterizes the animal kingdom, not the plants, the animal kingdom and humans. And the fire body is something that humans have in a way that the other kingdoms don't have, an individualized body of self-consciousness. Animals are for sure conscious, definitely, but this inner self-consciousness that a human being carries as our individuating process is what we work on in a different way. In a sense, we're the composite creature on the earth. So much more to say about that. But next week, I'll be talking about the four elements in the human being. But we're going to have Harald now, my husband, take us through the plants in nature and the elements in nature and most especially in the plants.
So I'm very excited to be here with you as well. And I love to hear Cynthia, who has this incredible clarity in everything she's bringing. So I will talk with you now about the plant world, and how it lives with the other actually elements, but also the other kingdoms of nature. And when I say plant, actually I mean water. This would be the water element. And if you think of water, the carrier of life. And so with the plants, we have actually that, what is alive. And it is most precious. And this allows our life here on earth, and also of the animals as well. And it changes everything to have the plant. So what I would like to begin with is actually just taking a seed, this tiny little seed, And when you see the seeds, you could think mineral on the one hand, but the other way around, you could think of it as fire, as the last process in the plant reaching its goal. So you have the little seed and you place it now into the earth. And it has to go there. The seed wants to be in the earth. It doesn't belong elsewhere. There's few plants that grow on trees in the tropics or in water, just in water, but mostly it belongs in the earth. And when we put the seed in the earth, it just rests there and waits. And for us here, we're so very happy because right now, with the rain, all the seeds have sprouted in nature. And we see this little bit of growth. But so imagine now, so you have this dark earth, mineral for the most part, also some organic matter, a little bit of soil life in there, soil creatures, and it's waiting. And now comes the water, which is in a certain way fertilizing it. And with this, now it sprouts. And the shell that is around the seeds will be burst open. And there's two parts in the plant that starts growing now. One is the radicle, which goes straight down, the first root. And with it, it gets into the direction of the center of the earth and going with gravity. It is grounded. And this is, now we come to looking at the two parts of the life of the plant. The one is this deep being buried or being grounded in the earth and taking the minerals and the water from the earth. And then on the other hand, though, the streaming up. So after the radicle has gone down, now the plant starts appearing. For us, we see a lot of grass right now coming out of the ground. And with that shoot goes just the opposite direction, up towards the sun. So this is our the first thing that we witness. And when it's not grass that we're seeing with other plants, we would very often see rounded forms. We come out of the ground, and in there the root is somewhat more hardened. It's the hardest element in the plant. In the very beginning, soft, but then it becomes hard. So it's in a way the root is mineral-like. But so the plant grows now out of this dough with the help of water, and now it reaches the light. But the light is not that important yet. In the beginning, it is strongly in the sphere which is close to the ground, and that's the watery realm. So you tend to have more round forms. And then the plant makes one leaf after another. And just imagine, just think of all the different plants that you've seen and all the different forms, all the possibilities that you have in there. And then you may see eventually also how they change these leaves. So you have the lower leaves, and then you have the spiraling direction actually of the leaves sort of appearing along the stem, that the shoot that grows now up. And in a way, as this happens, the plant gets more and more into the light. And we may see a change in the plant. And what we may see too is that actually that what was before condensed on the ground now starts lifting up, and we experience sort of more of a lightness. There are a good number of plants that begin as a rosette. That means all the leaves are in one place together. Just think of a head of lettuce, or maybe spinach if it's not, you don't have individual leaves. They all come from one place, and they're still close to the earth in this watery realm. But then when the light calls it, and also some outer warmth maybe, then they push up. And so now we have a separation. And what you see then is that actually leaf after leaf, there's a slight change, and maybe there's more distance between each leaf, and the plant grows and gets closer to the sun, to the light and the warmth. And when it does this, there comes a time then when the leaves in a way, what should I say? They almost they burn away almost, and the plant wants to come to a new stage. And what happens is that in this shoot that before you always would see new leaves coming, now suddenly you see something that's similar to an organ formation. All grows together. It's not that parts and then changing, but rather it is together. And you see something that's almost like an end, and you feel the plant is coming to an end. But of course, it's still too early. So what you see then is that this, you recognize the form ever more. There's green sepals that hold everything together, still green, but now all for coming from one point. We don't have the possibility any longer for new shoots coming from there, but it's all together. And then you get more curious, what is going to happen there? And you could look closer. And now, at some point, you have this bursting too, that this bud opens, and there you have color. You have color, and then a little later, you have fragrance, and then a little later, you have pollen flowing. That's very different. You could almost say the plant is no longer plant. The plant is moving to this next realm, to this air realm, actually where it meets then very often, not all plants, meets actually the animal kingdom. The most important place for many plants is this meeting with the insect. And the insect are some birds that come and do the pollination. So there's a meeting place. We could say a meeting between the etheric, the life body, but then also something that's no longer directly part of the plant, but is still, so to say, like a cloud surrounding the plant, what is astral, what is almost of a sentient nature. And this has a lot to do with the air, in the air space. And this now opens itself. In this moment, you have the feeling the plant is hardly plant any longer. It wants to move on. And then you have the fragrance. And what you see in there is the plant is no longer contained. Because the fragrance, you notice being away. You can be a little further away and you smell it already. And then the other thing that may happen is that you can experience the pollen. There's some plants people don't like to experience, ragweed or certain plants that really give people trouble. They start sneezing. But what you see there is that actually the plant begins to move away. And this quality, of course, is more related to an animal than to a plant. And at that moment, actually, when the plant totally loses itself, just think of this, the pollen flowing and going into the air, maybe the pollen flowing all the way up to the stratosphere. In that moment, the plant gives off its life, but at the same time, it allows itself to find itself eventually. But there's a moment of total excarnation. And this time now, at this point, the warmth element is the strongest in the plant. And now the seeds can form. And then with this, then the plant can come to its final destination, if you will. So just again, to see it beginning in the dark earth, that's where the plant belongs, but also sort of to the heaviness, to gravity, to the ground. But then in there, you have the watery element present that helps the plant actually to get born and then come out of the ground, come into the realm of air, and out of the air and into the light, and then in this finally developing the fire. That's the life of the plant. And that is sort of, if you will, a little bit isolated, yeah? But we should take a closer look at this and maybe also seeing a couple of pictures to know actually how does the plant develop? How is it changing? Because what you see in the plant is really the journey of life that we all know personally in our biographies too, how we have a journey. We come from something being dreamy, not being quite there yet, and then gradually we see life. And there's certain conditions that need to be met first. And for the plant, in most cases, they need the light in order to flower. Not all of them are that way, but most of them are that way. Here, I give you a picture. Here you have a plant. This is a kind of a buttercup. And look here, the lowest leaf. This is a plant that is incredibly if you will, compact and in a hurry to fulfill its life, its need. So you have the lowest leaves here, and look how round it is. Yeah. The next leaf is already a little bit different. Here you see a little bit more sticking out and slightly different. The third leaf, more differentiated, and in a way, some parts are pushing out and others are pulled in. When you come then to the fourth leaf here, it's already transformed. It's almost like here you have rays of light. Well, here you had a drop of water, and now here you have rays of light, and then you still have one more, and then this plant is finished. So this is quite a dramatic plant, and there are more. I will show you some more too. But now I'll show you also another plant where there is no change. It just remains the same. What's going on in there? This is a plant that grows more kind of on the ground. It doesn't stay upright long. It's more like almost a creeper. And you see here leaves, maybe even another shoot coming out. And then here it begins to flower. But this is not the end. It continues, and the next leaf looks just the same and does over and over the same thing. So here, there is no metamorphosis because basically also the plant remains in this realm of water, close to the earth. Yeah? Okay, I will show you a couple of others. This here is sow thistle. It's a kind of a thistle or like a weedy plant. But it's beautiful because here you really see kind of step by step this change from really round, very round, watery growth and small, quite small. The first germinating the cotyledon here, then getting a little bigger, yet bigger. And you see it pushes more out. It pushes out into the world. And now here, differentiation. There's something different coming in as well. You still have the roundness here, the wateriness. And mind you, in the beginning, all this is as a rosette on the ground. And only in time, then the plant grows up. You could see this far, maybe just on the ground. And then it changes and it comes up and changes. And here you see the shift coming with the pointedness getting stronger. And then it's almost inside out. Here, you know, you have this pointed direction, smaller, smaller. And after this, we don't see it here, there would be the flower. So you see, you can experience this journey, really going through the element, out of the earth, the mineral earth, through the watery element, through the air, and then entering finally during flowering into the fiery sphere. I think it's very good to experience this, to see this. And then with this too, you see it? Oh, well. So what I wanted to show you too is that you could experience the effect of the light, what the light has on the plant. As it is close to the ground, here you have a totally, a very much rounded form. And then a little higher up, the forces are different. And so you have a different response. The plant developed differently. And then yet higher, closer to the flowering, you have more of a pointedness. So just you have to realize now too how the plants live in their environment and how some of them are very sensitive to the environment and others are almost maybe more fixed on one element and may remain all the time watery or only change late. Yeah, for instance, your lettuce, you hope that it stays in the watery very long and doesn't change into something more, start to flower and get bitter. Okay. I think that could maybe do for now. So I mentioned to you how in the final state in the flowering, the plant comes into this air, this realm of warmth and fire, and changes that way. There's some plants where that goes differently. There are some plants, they're still green, and yet you come and you smell them. For instance, many members of the mint family have that quality. So there, you could almost say, because you smell them from afar, that means also it's almost moving away. That plant has something that goes almost beyond itself. It wants to be flowering, but on a different level. So we call these, or this process, or what we have in the plant would be essential oils forming. And they are strong in some plants before they're flowering. So this makes it into special plant that would be then a healing plant and could be very important. I would like to speak next actually about the relationship of the plant to the different realms that surround it or that they're in contact with. So the first one is the mineral. The plant from the mineral, actually the earth, so to say, earth element, what it needs in the earth are minerals that it needs for building its body. Yeah, that could be potassium, that could be carbon, and so on. And this is very important. But then also what you would see is some organic matter. And in a way, the presence of the plant changes the soil or changes the ground. The earth itself is mineral, but through the presence of plants and them decaying eventually and their roots decaying, the earth becomes more and more alive. So the plant makes a great contribution to the earth. And of course, when we're gardening or farming, we have to make sure there's enough life in the earth for this. Now, when we move on, it is the water that calls the plant forth, and that represents sort of this movement, this gentle movement. It is not moving per se, but rather it is just, well, stretching, if you will. That means we have growth there in the first place. And that is the quality of what the water brings. But per se, it does not go yet all the way into reproduction. Then you can ask the two, what do other plants do to a plant? They all are supporting each other. So it's very important that we understand this, that plants are good for each other, and that it's good not to just have one plant, but a lot of them, and the more supportive life is surrounding them. Next, we come to the air element. And in there, then we have the insects, or we have the animal, sort of the animal, the home of the animal kingdom. And the insects are essential, particularly in pollination. But just imagine too, you're next to a plant and you just watch there and you see them flowering, and then you hear an insect and you hear the buzz, and it comes closer and it goes to the flower and it sits on the flower and it's shaking, and this brings about also pollination just in that moment. That's important, very important for the plant. And in a way, this warmth, or the insect who brings the warmth that finally completes the journey then for the plant. Yeah, so that's one end. And then of course there are other bugs that are not just helpful. They may take from the plant, and but in a way still they belong together. And then a whole other group of animals would be the grazers, the animals that graze over the land and that eat from the plant, but normally also not destroying it. And through this now, the plant actually gets stimulated. Maybe you know, when you keep cutting your hair does well. When you stop cutting your hair, it also grows, it goes slower. So when we mow the lawn and we don't have the animals, also this is a stimulation to the plant. So they need to be stimulated. But at the same time, what does this mean? It is only the plant, through the plant, that the animal can be. The animal may eat different kind of, also different animals, but it's ultimately, it all comes back to the plant. So very, very important. And then through this, so when the animal, the grazers have gone over the land, they leave their manure in place. And this again improves the ground. So you see, we're making more and more a lively environment for actually for all of us. And finally, this would be us then to the human being. And for us, it is the food. Of course, we love the joy of being in an environment that is not hostile, like a desert where you don't have any protection, but rather you have the modification of the air. And so we are in a place where we can be, but then most important for us too is the food. And let's look at that a little bit too. How is this when out of plants we make food plants? What happens in there? Just think first for a moment of weed, a little plant that grows, and within two to 3 months, it has made seeds again. Well, most likely that's not well suited to be a vegetable. Some of them you could take, some leaves. But what we have done in our work as human beings and breeders is that we have developed more succulence in the plant. That means that the plants actually become, they slow down in their growth. What was before maybe a fast-moving weed, going quickly to flower and to seed, now has been held in a state of use for longer. Yeah. And this is actually what we as human beings need. We are the ones who stay young, who don't get old, at least in our abilities to learn and to grow. And so our understanding of well-being and having an inkling of what we need, that we should have something that has succulence, or where something has become stronger than it would be in nature, had developed, that we knew we want to create this. Yeah. And then you have plants that may form a thick root, but not just a hard root. Let me give you the example of Queen Anne's lace. You have this beautiful flower, and the Queen Anne's lace is the wild carrot, but the root is all hard. But if it has been worked on further and also has been brought into cultivation by giving more fertility, it changes. And now we have a plant with a beautiful and refreshing, crunchy flavor, which is very good for us. Yeah, so the carrot is very good for our health. And you know where it works? Well, it's particularly good. It's for our sense organization. It's good for our eyesight, but it's good for thinking. So the roots all together go in this direction of stimulating actually sense activity. So, and there's many different kinds, many different roots, and some of them are not even roots. For instance, the potato is really a transformed stem. And you can see this when you study a potato, you see these eyes, different places where you see it's just like a stem where a bud comes out. So on the one hand, you have this stronger development in the root. Then next we would come to the shoot or to the greens. Yeah, and then we have one leaf after the other. And there's so many green plants that we use. Say what we use as salad, for instance, lettuce and the like. Very refreshing. And in a way, it stimulates a different area in us, more the rhythmic system. And think of this area too in the plant where you have leaf after leaf after leaf after leaf. It is just like our breathing, our heartbeat, sort of this rhythmic activity in appearance of the leaves. There again, we have managed to have plants slow down. For instance, a cabbage actually normally grows seeds only in the second year. The first year, it makes the head, makes it nice and big. And then in the second year, it pushes up in springtime that it flowers and then makes seeds and comes to an end. So then there's another group, well, there's not very much in the air or in the flowering stage. well, there's some maybe more Chinese vegetables that they have in flower and flower buds. So if you think of broccoli, something similar to broccoli, here we have that stage. But then finally, when the plant has flowered and has formed, then finally either seeds or fruit, that is the last stage. And now think for a moment, grasses or grains. So you have actually something very simple growth, just leaf after leaf in the early stage, but then pushing up and pushing up high. And when you see, for instance, wheat, as it gets ripe or riper, it starts shining. And then eventually all the force is only in the ears on top, protein formation. And then the rest actually is left behind. The straw is very poor, but it's good also for the land. So you have a high concentration of something that has a lot of power, but also this will need transformation. This is something you could not eat raw. You need to really cook the grains to be more accessible for us. So that's on the one hand. But then we also have fruit formation, where something that in nature was very simple, where the seed just forms alone. Here we have even more of a slowing down process, and that something forms that is more almost vegetative. And only in the very center then you have the seed. Think of an apple. The tree needs to grow for a few years before it starts flowering, or before you would have your first apple or other fruit. Yeah. So here something is held back to give us then fruit. In the tomatoes, the same process goes faster, but it's just different that it's not just about the seeds, but rather what surrounds it. And again, we have worked on this, that the plant takes in more, also works with the organic matter, needs some nitrogen maybe to come to this, to get to all this growth. Yeah. So that is how our plants grow, that we need particularly, and it is it's good to get to know them too. So I urge you to kind of meet them in a garden or in a farm if you have not done it yet. So there's some plants that would give us trouble. I mentioned first the herbs that have a lot of essential oils. That's a good process. So here you have almost like a cooking process taking place further down in the plant, not just in the flower and the seeding. But then there's some plants too that are actually dangerous for us. Those would be poisonous plants. What happens there? And also what's involved in it. I described before how in the flowering, the plant kind of comes to a certain end process, and how the flower could be the sort of the culmination of the growth. You have to think of a sunflower for a moment. You have the leaf after leaf after leaf, and then finally on top you have the sunflower forming, and that's the end of it. And there are some that have multi flowers, have more flowers, and many of the flowering plants you see actually all in the periphery of the plant. You see the flowering. And when you see this, you could have an inkling of that this astrosphere, so that this sphere of air, actually that's also related to nitrogen, and this air element is becoming very active in there. And this is okay, so if this comes as the final state. But there's some plants where this flowering or wanting to flower or be flower-like or even have air space within becomes too strong. And when that is so strong, you could say, well, Steiner describes it as something coming, that the air almost is pushing down into it, of this airiness, of the astrality of that what otherwise normally is in soul beings, and it happens in a plant where it is too early. Then this will give us, it could possibly kill us for plants, some nitrate plants that would kill us. It could send us sort of out maybe in hallucinations or whatever. That means these are plants that we cannot transform in ourselves. Yeah. However, these plants may be very important for medicine making. Many of these poisonous plants are very important. Now, I want to talk a little bit more also the plant in the cosmos, and begin just by looking a little bit more also at the seasons. Our climate here has a different picture from what I'm used to in Germany, where I grew up. And that was that everything is sort of sleeping in the winter. You don't see any life. All the life has withdrawn into the earth and is waiting there as potential. And finally in spring, it's called up and all the life expands again and shows itself in the greening of the leaves, in the trees and so on. Here it's a little different, but here the life nevertheless, at this season, the life is close to the earth in the winter. We don't have much higher plants any longer. In my garden here, I just pulled the tomatoes, which were higher, were propped up. And so now I see directly the ground. And so we are reminded too, this is where the life comes from. And in the winter, it wants to be close to it. And so altogether, we have this sense of contraction in the plants. And some things go still well here, but a lot of them have to wait for springtime. Then in spring, finally, the earth is loosened and all the saps of the earth. So in a way, the earth's life body expands. And you see this then when you go to trees, then you can see how it begins often at the bottom, the lower branches, and then pushing up, and you can really experience the change in the life body of the earth. And then when you're traveling during that time, go to the mountains, then it's gone, and you go down again, and you see it happening again. And then this finally comes to the stage of the summer where everything is in bloom, or at least the wildflowers. And you have the experience that the earth is giving off its life to the universe. And we may go along with it to some extent, if we want it or not. We're more extroverted and want to be in nature. And then finally, now at this time, become more within ourselves. But the plant is very strongly in these rhythms and lives with it. And as gardener, we can only grow really what fits into a certain season. Otherwise, we will not have any success. So this is the big picture sort of this inhalation in the winter, exhalation in the summer. And this picture, though, in a small way, we have during the day. In the morning, it is springtime. And as all the fresh vitality comes into the plant, it happens every day. Yeah. The plant actually, the sap in the plants rise. So it's good to harvest in the morning and they grow well. And afternoon, they kind of slow down. And then the afternoon, the late afternoon, it's a good time for transplanting. Plant actually kind of orients itself more towards the earth with actually cell division and so on in the night. And so you have this division in a finer way also in the day, what otherwise we have in the whole year. So these rhythms are important. They're definitely very important for the farmer and gardener. But then there are other elements as well. And that is actually the moon. And the moon has the strongest influence actually on plant reproduction. Without the moon, we would have plant growth, but we would not have really generative reproduction. That happens with the help of the moon. And if this happens, we have to pay extra attention that we get also water for the plants, that they can grow. They may do better if we plant before the full moon and give them enough water that they can grow. So those are some aspects that may be helpful to understand some more about the plant. And I wanted to end this part with just looking again how important plant life is for us and how the plant is really the giver. We take a lot from nature, we take the most, and we have to do that so that we can actually be productive in life and that we can have our self-consciousness. We must take from nature and in the food, through the food, transform what comes from it, and that we can do what we need to do. The animal to some extent does it too, but not quite in the same way. But the plant is just giving. And in my contribution here, I wanted to bring that to that we should always be aware of this. This giver of life that brings this sort of woven fabric of life around the earth differently at different times, and that we treat it the right way, rest together with the earth herself, and then the animals that are surrounding it. So that's all I wanted to say right now, and we can have questions, or maybe it's other aspects still coming.
Let me just point to where we'll go next week, and then we will take some questions. As I said, next week I want to talk about the 4 elements in the human being, and part of that story will be to see how we have in our, particularly in the liver, in the lungs, in the heart, and in the kidneys, we have organs that correspond to the 4 elements. That's only part of the picture. We also see how they correspond to the planets, but we're not going to go there. But the question is, when we eat nature, we're taking the elements inside ourselves, earth, water, air, and fire. And Rudolf Steiner has a very powerful sentence in that he says, whatever we cannot transform of the natural world when we eat becomes a poison in us, makes us sick. Meaning, we don't just eat lettuce and turn it into we have to tear down the formative forces that the lettuce brings with it. And in tearing it down, we're in a way freeing or disenchanting cosmic forces, the forces of soul, of condensation. We're freeing them up inside of us so that they can be used to create our thinking and our feeling and our bodies. And so we're going to look at that, the process of how we meet nature in our digestion. And I really hope to also get to the question of, I was born of the sun and the stars and the moon, and then I dove into the 4 elements and talk at least a little bit of embryology, a fabulous topic to study. And then in the last week, we'll be looking at elemental beings and at what we call the etheric forces in us and in nature. So this module here has 4 courses, and yeah, we're going to continue on this journey. So we would very, very much like to take your questions, Harald and me both. You might really like to take advantage of asking Harald some questions. So Michelle, our dear Michelle, is our modulator and moderator. And she thought, no, moderator. And Michelle,
A new role. So Tish asked, will we hear more about the 2 strong air element and poisonous plants? And Harald, this does sound like one right up your alley.
Yes, right. Yes, so the plants where we that has too much light are sometimes plants that are can be plants that in a way take too much in and maybe the light is too intense, so you can have plants with intensive flowering or tubular, for instance, tubular flowers. Think of that Jimson weed or datura. Well, I mean, you may not know all of those that are poisonous or other plants. So air, where an air element is incorporated. Here we have a plant, poison hemlock, that has root chambers. In the roots, there's air. So the air normally surrounds the plant. And in the animal, we have an inner airway circulation, but not in the plants in the same way. And so whenever that process is getting too strong, that the air becomes almost independent within the plant, not just surrounding it, but within, then this can happen. Doesn't have to happen. Not all of the plants that have a particularly strong flowering aspect would do it. And some of them may need moderation. Even think of something like the beans. Now, in the beans, you have something very unusual that actually they are capable in their leaves sort of almost to collect the air and send it down into these nodules that are in the root sphere that carry nitrogen and that then later feed the plant to make the bean. Now, this is something that's almost a little, normally you have this breathing out in the plant, but here you have a strong breathing in. Now, beans are great, but you better cook them. If you eat a lot of raw beans, you would get cyanide poisoning. So there are aspects where we just need to see where is something too strong, and maybe the cooking can be, in certain cases, do something. Similar to manioc is a more tropical, almost more root plant, where also we have to cook it first so that it becomes usable. But if you know Jimson weed or flower, these trumpet kind of flowers, or think nicotiana, tobacco, and long flowers. Yeah. And there you see something, almost the air wants to move in, almost wants to be held within. And that can be trouble. Not for all of them, and it's fascinating study. I love to go there. In my early years here, when I first arrived, was growing medicinal herbs for a pharmacy, also for medical center.
So it's so interesting how all the plants relate to the elements in different ways.
Right,
No?
right.
They all are, like, each one a specific creation that is telling us a story about the creation of the earth.
Right, right. And is it more watery? Is it more closer to the earth? Is it even mineral that gives us something for our head? Or is the air, which moves then away from the earth, is that too strong? And when that is sort of, it wants to become animal, that could be tricky.
Yeah. And you spent your life reading the plant world.
Right, yes.
Just about everything. When you look at a plant, driving around with this man is extraordinary. Yeah.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
This one, oh, here we go. Rachel asked, will you talk more about the life and purpose of insects and their spiritual role?
So I try to maybe show it a little bit that the insects, just by coming to the plant, there's a relationship too, an ancient relationship that they originated together, the insects and the plants. And in a way you could call a flower a butterfly that is fettered to the earth, or the butterfly would be a plant that flew away. So there's a very from earliest times, sort of where when the earth was not hardened in the way how it is today, these kingdoms were closer together, and particularly in this light, sort of in the air space in which the insects are, that they kind of evolved in just slightly different ways. If you were to read in what's it called, Harmony of the Creative Word,
By Rudolf
Steiner, where he also talks about elemental beings that should be mentioned later again. We have a very nice description in the fourth lecture in there about this.
Yeah, that's quite an extraordinary picture, that the insects and the flowers, in many cases they're specific, not always, but in many cases there's a specific insect for a specific flower It's almost as if in some level of their development, they've just separated and half of it got attached to the stem and the other half was allowed to fly. And Rudolf Steiner also explains so wonderfully in many of these flying insects, their development is exactly parallel to a plant, like the egg of some of these insects, for instance, a butterfly, but not only. The egg looks like a seed, and then the larva or the caterpillar looks like the stem.
With the leaves,
Yeah, and then the cocoon is like the calyx of the flower.
Yeah, the bud.
The bud, which then opens up like the flower does. So there's in some cases, almost a complete correspondence between the development of the two.
And then also the relationship of particular plants and animals to each other, insects to each other. We have a swallowtail butterfly here at the river, and it can only go to one particular plant to lay their eggs. That's it. And I don't even know if it's different species. And it lays their eggs there, and it always eats some of the plant, but never too much. And so they coexist. And this is very important for us also to realize, just that this idea of just competition, and either you or me or whatever, one or the other, no, they're together. And this is in many, many different areas.
What, you mean they're not competing to
No.
see who's the richest or most powerful?
No, not at all.
Something about collaboration?
That's right.
Okay, I guess we could learn something from that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Wow.
Okay, before I get to Judy's comment, Patty said, what is the name of Steiner's book, Harmony of the Something World?
Creative world, word.
Okay,
And the
Harmony
Of
of
the creative
the-
word,
Creative, W-O-R-D.
yes. And
Okay.
the old title was Man as Symphony of the Creative Word.
And it
Man,
is from October maybe through December or November of 1923.
Fabulous
It was
lectures.
really fabulous.
There we go, yep.
okay, Man as Symphony of the
Creative word.
Creative Word.
You should see the title in Germany. In German,
Den Mensch als Zusammenklang. des
man is
Mensch.
the human being as a symphony of the creating, ringing, cosmic world word. It's just
Wow.
great.
Okay, coming back to Judy's. Judy's came in two parts. So she started out by saying, I love to see the star on the fruit stem, often the five-pointed star, the star in the apple, beautiful reminders of our universal connection. And then she said, my comment is really relating to the planet's sensitivity to the movement of the stars.
Right. And this, of course, for the plant world, is mostly related actually to the planetary sphere and not to the zodiac. The plants actually have direct relationship to sort of in different ways relate to plant growth in the way how the plant grows. Very strong relationship, of course, to the moon. But then on the other end, you would have Saturn, and Saturn is the furthest away. And now think to the moon taking 27 and a third day to be in the same constellation again where it was before. And Saturn will take 29 and a half years for the same thing. Totally different. So you can see also how the weeds and the annual plants relate to the moon, and how the far planets actually relate more to food, to trees, but also more to food quality. Yeah, that's one aspect. And so you could see maybe movement in different plants. For instance, the plants that have like the tulips or the lily, very often or always you have actually the 3 or 6 in the flower. You may have 3 and then another 3 and that is relationship to Mercury. And so you have there's different relationships. I think there's a book too that describes this. So are they related? You have this opposite movement, say with a full moon, new moon, which is sort of an opposite movement across, or is it a different configuration you could see in the plants?
Thank you. Now, it's either Zoe or Zoe. You may need to help me with this one. It says sound ether in plants. So we might,
We're
Does
not
that
really
make-
ready to go there, are we?
No. Even though, so it has to do actually with the watery element, which is so strong in the plant, and yet also the plant lives right at the boundary to come where it wants to become animal. So this is what we were in part were dealing. But on the whole, it is the sphere of the living. And of course, that would be this in the sound ether. But I couldn't say enough here. That would take a whole.
okay,
Yeah, just one more question before we're done, right?
I think so. Oh goodness, now we've got 2 questions that have come in. Okay, Rachel's question is, any suggestions or thoughts on how to view and approach the invasive insects that can take over garden foods? In regards to biodynamic gardening, it doesn't feel right to kill them, yet there is at times an imbalance there. We are 1 year into our biodynamic garden, if that matters. I'm looking for what is happening with the imbalance and their purpose.
Right. So I dealt with it actually 2 days ago in the evening. And it was about a plant, about animal problems. And particularly in the beginning, you have more of those. The more balance you get, the more buffering, the more healthy soil you have, the stronger the plants will be. And also the using biodynamic practices with the preparations help the plants to become stronger over time, that they are not as well tender, maybe yummy for an insect because they're more firm and the insect can't get in as easily, as an example. So it will take a while. And yet there are certain times when you have to make the decision, will I let the crop go or do I do something heavier? And what do I risk in the process? If I use any organic, insecticide, then I may be killing other beneficial insects. So it's a tricky one. And I think the most important is to live with the animals and really study them and get to know them and also to appreciate them in what they're doing for nature, because they all have their task. But they could also be too much if they come in huge amounts. If you think of locust, just you have clouds of insects, then it can be a problem.
Yes. Okay. Now you're going to have to guide me here. We've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful because we really need to close here.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
Natural dyes. Are you ready to do that one, Harald?
Oh, that's so beautiful.
That's
But
Craig-
no, that's a different
Craig
story. Yeah,
Wilkinson,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the one before that one is, what about carnivorous plants?
Yeah, so there again, there's a good example of where there's too much astrality in the plant and they are even hungry for other animals. They are not hungry for other animals, but they can handle them. Yeah, so you see they're a little bit out of their league, out of their regular plant league, but it exists. And of course, you always have kind of weirdos. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Craig is asking about color. Craig, we hope we see you at one of our biodynamic meetings for more conversations about plants,
Yeah,
plants and the color that they create.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Craig does wonderful work with indigo
Yeah.
dyes and plants.
Yeah. And so, of course, that is an astral element, if you will, and that comes more through the outer planets primarily.
So Craig, that
Alright.
sounds like an invitation for further conversations at another time.
Yeah.
Harald and Cynthia, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank
Thank you, it
you
was a great
so
pleasure.
much. It was a pleasure. And once again, if we may just remind you that this is all funded out, this is all free will work, and we're very grateful if you